Hello, it's Kim from Sixpenny Memories, and this is our first block for our Sixpenny Memories sew along. So today we are doing a variable star block in various sizes. We are going to do a 12-inch block. I'm going to tell you the instructions how to do a 12-inch block, which is this one here. And also we are going to make a 6-inch block. Now those two sizes that I've given you are finished sizes, as in when you've sewn them together. That actually, as they are now, 6.5 inches and 12.5 inches. Now for the purposes of the video, I'm going to talk to you about both sizes. I'm going to constantly give you both size measurements. This is not a professional setup. I haven't got a cameraman here. I've started this because of the awful situation that we are in at the moment, and I really just want to come into your sewing room with your permission and share some blocks. Hopefully this is not going to go on forever. I've actually planned 12 blocks, so I'll just quickly show you. I have a what you call it, a program on my computer. I've lost the thing with all the pictures on. Oh dear. Well, I have done 12 blocks because I showed them earlier on Facebook. I'll get the picture and I'll find it for you. So the first one we're going to do, as I say, is the variable star block. Now what you're going to need is, for the centre, for the 12-inch block, you are going to need a 6.5-inch square. For the corners, you are going to need 4 3.5-inch squares. Now this is the background of this flying geese block, and for the background for this method you will need 4 6.5 by 3.5 inch rectangles, and for the star points, which is where the pink ones are, you're going to need 8 3.5 inch squares. Now if you're doing the smaller one, the 6-inch finished one, you will need, for the centre square, a 3.5 inch square. For the corner blocks, you will need 4 2-inch squares. For the background of the flying geese, you're going to need 4 2-inch by 3.5 inch rectangles. And for the star points here, you're going to need 8 2-inch squares. So that's your requirements list that you need. And the first thing we're going to do is, once you've done all of your cutting, I'll show you. I'm going to work, as I say, with the I'm going to do the smaller one. You will need a rotary cutter if you've got one, because that's the way of getting really accurate cutting. You're going to need a ruler. I love my 6.5 by 12 inch, and if you're buying one for the first time, a 6.5 by 24 inch. Everything I'm talking about is available on the six-penny.com website. And if you sign up to the newsletter, you get an extra 15% off. So you need a ruler, and you also need a cutting mat. Now, I have a 12-inch and a 8-inch rotating cutting mat. If you're buying one for the first time, go for your 12-inch one. These are just really useful and really handy. I'm going to use the 8-inch one, which is perfect for this this project. And the reason that they're good is because when you've got your fabric on, they actually rotate. It's quite hard doing it. Look at it. There, it's got suction pads on the bottom. Wash my hands. I can't there. So can you see the board actually rotates around, which means that you're not moving your fabrics. So the first thing I'm going to show you is, I'm going to need that, is the cutting. Now another reason for doing the smaller block is that you may have scraps of fabric. We all have scraps of fabric, little bits of fabric here, and this little 6-inch block finished only uses smaller pieces. So I have a spare rectangle here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop it onto my cutting mat. Now if you are concerned that one of the edges, that the edge that you're going to cut is not straight, I always put it over. Can you see that the fabric is hanging over that first line, and that's what I'm going to marry up my ruler onto my board. So I'm going to get my 6.5 by 24 inch ruler, and I'm going to pop that onto there. And again, I'm going to show you. So can you see I can marry up the ruler and the board? I'm just getting a bit closer. I'll get it married up, and I can cut a straight line. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Now the cutter that I'm using at the moment is the new Prim Love cutter. It's got a lock on the back, but once you've unlocked it, it's brilliant because it exposes the blade when you put pressure on. If I show you, I love this rotary cutter. It's ergonomically designed. So can you see, as I pop the pressure on, can you see the blade's exposed and it's covered? And then it's exposed and it's covered. And it just means I can put it down and I don't have to worry about cutting my fingers. The girls, when I used to have the shop, or if you're doing a workshop with me, will actually love the fact that I'm going to be using this because, or if you're using it, because I won't be shouting across the room, cover your blade. So I've straightened off that edge and now I'm going to cut a 2-inch square for the star points. So I've just show you tipped up here. I could easily use the board because there's 1 inch and 1 inch is there and then your 2 inches here. So I could use the board. I actually personally prefer to use my ruler. So I find the 2-inch line on there and I put that on the edge, sorry, the light's reflecting, on the edge of the fabric and I cut. It's personal preference. Doesn't matter whether you're right or left-handed, you'll do it. If you're right-handed, always, oh goodness gracious me, excuse me. I will just silence this. Somebody's trying to contact me and I'll tell them to go away. Oh, how unprofessional. Go away, I'm on YouTube. Just told them to go away because I'm doing a YouTube video. So I'm just going to pop that onto there and I'm going to cut away from me. This is the joys of, I'm going to turn that on silent now actually. I had it on silent before when I was doing the Facebook Live and I haven't popped it on to silent. It's always the same, isn't it? People always want to ring you when you don't want them to. And I will just get rid of that and I'll just switch this off. So talking about your rulers, as I say, you can actually use your ruler or your cutting mat. Always cut away from you. If you're right-handed, you'll always have the rotary cutter in your right hand. If you're left-handed, you'll always have the rotary cutter in your left hand. Never cut across yourself, it's dangerous. Now the beauty about this rotating mat is because I don't want to move my fabric, so I can just rotate the board. So I'll rotate it and now my fabric is facing this way. It's horizontal. I'm going to straighten off the fabric again. So I've got it hanging over that line, just picking a line, straightening that off. And I'm putting my ruler on top of the bit that I don't want to use, I don't want to move. And then I'm going to cut a 2-inch square, get the ruler the right way around and cut a 2-inch square. And that's it cut. And then we're good to go. So there you have a perfect 2-inch square. Now that's for the star points of the 6-inch block. If you are doing the 12-inch block, remember that those star point squares would be 3.5 inches. So once you've got that star block square cut, what you're going to do is you're going to flip it over. So on the wrong side of the fabric, this is the right side of the fabric, on the wrong side of the fabric, you're going to draw a diagonal line. Now I like to use my Prim marking pencil because it doesn't matter what colour fabric I'm working with, whether it be a light or a dark. I have a pink, I have a grey, I have a yellow refills that go in there. It also always ensures that I have a nice fine point. So the other thing I'm going to do for drawing my lines, and it's great, you know, if you do all your cutting, you can sit in front of the television and draw all your lines on. You're literally just going to draw a diagonal line. And I'm using the Prim, sorry, it's the Omnigrid. Omnigrid are now owned by Prim. 6-inch by 1-inch ruler. If you saw me on Create and Craft last week, I actually had the 3 ruler set on, which also are fabulous because they are only a 1/2 inch wide. You get a 12-inch, a 4-inch and a 6-inch one. I'm having a hot flush as well, it's that time in my life. So what I've done is I've drawn a diagonal line from one corner to the other corner, and you're going to do that on all of your star squares. So remember, you'll have 8 2-inch squares if you are doing the small block, the 6-inch block, and 8 3.5-inch squares if you're doing the larger block. Now the next thing that you need is the background for the flying geese. Now whilst I'm showing you this way to do flying geese, this is not the only way to do flying geese. You may have a die cutting machine, and if you have a die cutting machine, these flying geese need to finish at 6.5 inch, but 6.5 by 3, sorry, not finish, be cut at 6.5 by 3.5 if you're doing the larger block, and cut at 2 inches by 3.5 if you're doing the smaller block. So if you've got a die cutting machine like an AccuQuilt, the Sizzix, the Gemini, whatever, or Scan and Cut, you could do that. When I'm saying to you there's different ways to do it, I have a flying geese book. It's called Flying Geese, a Gaggle, a Wedge and a Plump. And it's just my bit of silliness. A gaggle of geese is when they're on the ground, a group of geese on the ground. A wedge of geese is when they're in the air, but they're actually flying in that point. They're called a wedge of geese, did you know? And if they're flying all together in a bit of a clump, they're called a plump of geese. And because I've put different techniques in here, some allow you to cut, to create 4 flying geese at one time. Others are using up the scraps. The technique that I'm describing now is in here. We've also got a modern technique where it's all really wonky. And there's 3 projects in the back as well. 3 completely different projects in the back. So this book here will give you lots of different ways to do flying geese. Oh, there's also a folded flying geese in there one as well. And that's available at www.six-penny.com. So that I digress a little bit. But for the purposes of this, because I thought this was a really good scrap buster, your rectangles for your 12-inch block are going to be 6.5 inches by 3.5 inches, and for the 6-inch block they're going to be 2 inches by 3.5. So you're going to cut those. Once you've cut them, you're then going to place your star square on top of the rectangle. And I'm going to bring this in closer here, because what I want you to do is to put the point, can you see the oh, it's fallen off. The diagonal line has gone from that top to the bottom right, okay? And we're going to pop that on there, and you're just literally going to sew on the line. Now, sewing on your sewing machine. For this purposes of this, you're just going to use your standard foot. And can you see this is a brother foot? It's a brother foot. It's actually a standard foot. I think it might not be a brother foot, but it fits the machine. Can you see there's a groove? You might have a red mark on there, and that is the line that you're going to follow on your drawn line. So I'm going to pop that on there. I haven't got a light on my sewing machine. Actually, I don't think it would matter now. I think I could put my light back on, couldn't I? I think I will, because it's much easier when I've got the light on. When I was trying it out before, I didn't actually have, I had the sewing machine in view, but you couldn't actually see what I was doing, so I'm going to have to perfect it. Right, so what you're going to do is you're going to stitch on the line. When you've switched your sewing machine on, it tends to have, excuse me a second, I'm just going to shut my door. It tends to have the husband's hoovering. It tends to have a stitch length of 2.5 as a default on the brother. What I tend to do is I tend to cut it, I tend to reduce that stitch length down to 2, but it won't matter, 2.5. And the only reason I reduce it is I get a nicer, I feel like I get a nicer stitch. Oops, a daisy, I've done it, I've committed the criminal offence there. When you're starting with a point, which is what I should have done, is I should have started with a thread catcher. Now, a thread catcher is a piece of thread, a piece of fabric that goes into your machine and stops it, because sometimes when you're sewing with a point like I've just done, what happens is it doesn't matter what your machine is, but that the point of the needle catches the complete corner of your piece, and it goes down. And you know what it is? It doesn't matter how expensive your machine is, it can happen. So I'm just going to pop that in there. So it's a scrap of fabric. I'm just going to pop that in, and I'm just going to test that this is fine. I'm not going to stop this video because I think it's a good exercise. No, it's going to have a little moment. Just let me get this up. How annoying. It's because it wasn't happy. Sometimes it's better to re-thread top and bottom. If this happens to you, and I should have remembered to use the thread catcher, or I tend not to use a thread catcher if I'm doing straight sewing. If I'm doing something like this, I try and use a thread catcher. When you're sewing, you tend not to be videoing at the same time. So I'm just re-threading top and bottom like that, and then get my little mirror back on there, like that, and pop that back in. Oh, I haven't even threaded it. There we are, threaded. Make sure it's all running off lovely, which it is, and then try and sew it. Yes, sewn perfectly now. So can you see if you have a problem with your machine? So what I did there, if I show you, because it's a good one to show you, can you see where the needle went down in the corner and it tried to chew it up? So by using the thread catcher, it means that it'll not chew that up, that corner up, because it'll be on. So you're going to sew on the scrap of fabric and then sew off the scrap of fabric. So I'm just popping that back on. And sometimes, you know, I think it's good to show you the mistakes, because if I show you the mistakes, it's something that we all do. We all make mistakes. This is how we learn. Now, we're going to sew off and on. And what you can do is you can chain piece, no problem at all with this. And what I mean by chain piecing is you put one in after the other. And what happens is it gives you sort of a few stitches behind, in between each of the blocks, but actually it saves an awful amount of thread. So when you've done that, can you see it looks like this? It's hard to see the stitch line. The stitch line is from that top corner to that bottom one there. Now when you've done that, what you're going to do, traditionally you would have chopped all of this off and opened that up. But to try and get perfect blocks, I'm going to show you a little way that I do it. So fold those back out flat. This top corner here is the piece we're going to cut off. So I'm just going to fold back my background fabric. I'm going to get myself a nice pair of scissors, and I love these, they're called Prim Love scissors, and I'm just going to chop that off. You could use a rotary cutter for this, but I just think, oh, why? I can use my scissors and just eyeball it. So can you see the original rectangle is still intact, and I've just cut off the excess here. All right. Now I'm going to press it. And what you're going to do is I've just got in stock these 12-inch, and I've got a 17 by 12-inch wool pressing mat. With the wool pressing mat, you don't need to have your iron on too hot at all. They're just great. They give you really crisp seams. And the first thing you're going to do is just press, which is setting the seam, and then you're going to flip that star point over and pop it onto there. So now it looks like that. You're then going to get your other squares. She says, what are they? And we're going to put one on top of each other. Where have I put them all? 1, 2, 3. I thought it was all organised here before. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I need to cut some more. I've got 1 there, 2 there. That one's done. 3. I need another 2 squares cutting. So I'll just cut another 2 squares quickly. Got them all done. I've done them all in different pieces here. It's great. I love, this is going to be so lovely because it's going to be dead scrappy, which is the effect I wanted. I'm sure I cut them before, you know, but never mind. So anyway, with this one here, all I'm doing is I'm cutting a 2-inch strip because this is longer. And then I'll subcut the squares like that. I know I'm turning them round, but it doesn't matter. 1, and we need another 2. So this is just a fabulous way. Now, scrap busting, we talk about light, medium and dark fabrics, and I really don't want you to get too het up with that, because a fabric that appears to be light against one fabric can be dark against another, and vice versa. And I will show you, because at the moment I'm using a cream, and I've used this grey, and then I've got my centre square here. And when I put them together, I'll show you. It's amazing the difference you have with the tones of fabric. And whilst I haven't done all of these in exactly the same fabric, I've gone for tones. So I'm using all the sort of grey tones for these star points, and I'm using cream tones for the corners. Now the flying geese, can you see it behind me? You can see the block behind me. They are using the same fabric in the background, and they're using the same fabric for the points. you can do it whichever way you want. It'll be a bit more structured if you had all of the same fabrics. So I'm just cutting these off as before. So that's the points off as before. So now it looks like that. So I've got 1, 2. I've got one there. Have I sewn that one? Oh, do you want to do more haste, less speed, Kim? Yeah, I've done that one right. 3, cut this one, and then I've got my 4. So that's the 4 cut. Right, I'm going to get my pressing mat again, and this time we're going to do exactly the same. You're going to set the block. So remember, set the stitching, set the seam, and then flip it back on itself. That's 1. And do the same with that one. 2, because we need 4 of these. So if these were the larger block, these rectangles would end up, these flying geese units would end up finishing at 6.5 inches by 3.5 inches, but these ones are going to finish at 2 inches by 3.5. Right, that's those pressed. Now, can you remember we didn't do anything with the rectangle block? We kept that in the right size. And can you see where I've gone slightly over here on that one? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip it onto its back side. Let's get me a little rotating map so you can see. Flip it so it's like that, and I'm going to trim off this extra fabric here. So what will end up happening is when I come to start and construct my star, I haven't lost any of the background at all. I'm just, so I can match up my seams nicely, I'm just cutting off any excess of the star fabric. So if you've got, if it's sewn over, it's not going to affect your block at all. You're not trimming away any of the cream. So that one's fine. Now, if it turns out it's too small, I'll find one in a second because I'm bound to have one where I've sewn a little bit short. And the reason we all do it, we all get distracted. I'm sewing at the wrong angle here. I should be sewing with my machine straight on. There's only God perfect, as I say, so I don't stress about it because there's always a way around it. It's a bit of a fudge technique, this, but it doesn't matter. So I've trimmed off those tiny, tiny little bits, those little slivers I've just trimmed off, and I've now got 4 perfect flying geese blocks. Okay. Now, what I meant was, if it turned out, let's see if I can fudge it, if it turned out that you'd opened it up and it looked like that, don't worry about it, don't unpick it. As long as you can see that background square there, that rectangle, can you see it? That will disappear into your seam allowance, so don't worry about it at all. Okay, so that's our flying geese blocks done. Now, we're nearly there, we're working really well here. So now you're going to get your centre square. So the centre square for the small block was a 3.5 inch square, and the centre square for your big block is a 6.5 inch square. And you're going to get 2 of your flying geese units. I'm just deciding which 2 I'm going to have. I'm going to have those 2. And you're going to pin them so they're right sides together. So it looks like that, and we're going to pin it so it's right sides together so that the point, the V of that flying geese, that top point, is on that side. And you're going to pop a pin in. Oh, I've got my pins on my lovely prim wrist pin cushion. So I'm going to pop a pin in there. Oops. It's because it's there. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. So it's right sides together. So that top point is going right sides together on that side. And that's going there, like that. And we're going to pin that one. Now you then need to grab your 4 corner squares. So your 4 corner squares, if it was the large one, they were 3.5 inches. And if it was the small one, they were 2 inches. And what you're going to do is you're going to pin a square right sides together on the end of each of the flying geese units that you've just made. So pin those. Now I like to get all this done at once because I then go back to chain piecing. Remember, chain piecing's quick. It also saves your thread, so I'm all for that. And the thread I'm using is the Orifil 50 weight thread because it really beds into the seams. And when I'm sewing light projects, I tend to use the cream. And when I'm sewing dark projects, I tend to just use a grey. So I do not change my threads. Before I said to you about the light, medium and dark, let's just quickly go back. So if I was to put this pink fabric against this cream fabric, the cream fabric is the light against that, okay? And then if I add in this grey fabric, there's your dark. So you've got your light, medium and dark. But if I take the cream away, and can you see the pink then becomes the light against the dark of the grey? And if I was to add, whereas this isn't a fabric, but if I was to add something like that dark pink, and imagine that that's a fabric, that's a silicone mat, by the way, for the iron. But can you see now the grey becomes the medium, and that's your light. There's your medium and there's your dark. So it's personally, I think it's down to personal choice. I know there's various rules out there. There's various instructions out there. But to me, just have a look at your fabrics. You decide at the end of the day, it's what you want to achieve and what your look. You might like it all dark, but a good balanced block would have a light and a medium and a dark. I'm just changing my foot to a 1/4 inch piecing foot without a guide, just because the next stage we are actually going to do a 1/4 inch seam. So what I've done is I've pinned the corners, 2 of the corner squares to each end of 2 of the flying geese blocks, and I've sewn 2 of the flying geese blocks. I want to sew 2 of the flying geese blocks to either side of the centre square. And what I'm doing is I'm chain piecing, so I'm feeding one in after the other. And when I get to the end, I just grab my scissors, because you could do a nice long chain with this. So can you see they're sewn together? There's the thread in between, so I've just flipped it over and I'll sew those others. And this way it means you're never actually taking your fabric out of your machine, so therefore it reduces the chances of it snarling up in the machine. It means you don't have to use the thread catcher. Just keep on going. So I'll just do that last one. Get rid of those 2. That's the side I haven't sewn. So give me 1 second. And the reason I chose to do the 6-inch block was because the sides are longer, are shorter, and so therefore you weren't watching me, or not watching me sew. So now I've got myself as a little flag day here. I'm just going to snip them apart with my scissors, and then I'm going to remove the pins out of each one, and then we are back to pressing. But before I press it, I'm going to show you what they look like. So remember, the instructions are for both sizes. So your flying geese units look like that, and your centre row looks like that. So your top, you've got your your top and bottom row, and we've got the centre row. So we're going back to the iron board, and I'm going to set the seam. And what I tend to do at this stage is I flip my seams to one side and I press them towards the square, so it either goes towards the centre square or it goes towards those corner squares. So set the seams and then press. If you notice, my iron isn't going up and down like this. Press. It wants to go that way, doesn't it, darling? That's it. Go like that. I talk to my fabric as if it's a person. I talk to myself anyway at the best of times. I'm sure we all do. I get the right answer anyway. So I'm pressing the corners, and we are so close to finishing. It's untrue. It's a very, very quick block, a very versatile block. So what you'll have now is we've got that, that, and that, and that. So we've got the 3 like that. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to flip this onto here like that. Now, I did a course with Eleanor Burns, who's a very, very well-known quilter in the USA. And can you see there how the seams, you've got one set of seams going that way and one set of seams going the other way, and you can actually feel it with your fingers and lock those seams together. If you want to keep them in place, pop a pin. Technically the pin should go through the stitching. Just get that pin in there, it's fighting with me. Okay, and then pin the corners. Okay, and do the same with the other seam. Always do your seams first. Get those seams, get them nice and locked together, which they are. Pop your pin in to secure them. Eleanor never uses a pin. And then take that back to the sewing machine and sew the seam again at 1/4 of an inch. Just sew that down there. Now you can sew over your pins if you want to. Don't sew too fast is the clue. So just sew down there. Oops, just I'm trying pins everywhere now. Right, so that's that one done. And then what I do is, because I have a major problem with right ways and wrong ways, is I lay the block back out again. So can you see it's there, those two, and I flip this one onto here, and I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to lock those seams together because the seams are going either way, either side. So one seam's going one side and one's going the other. And so they're going to lie as flat as possible. Pin at the end. And then do exactly the same with the other one. Lock those seams together. Pop a pin in. Get that locked in and get to the end. And you're going to do exactly the same in your sewing machine with your 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew down the side. And this is the last piece of stitching we're doing for the block. So if you were chain piecing, you would do all of your blocks all at the same time. It's amazing how well it comes together. That's it. Now, once you've done that, we're going to remove the pins. Always check that you've done it right. Okay, so it looks like that. And then what we're going to do, and this is where the Primlove scissors come into their own, we're going to snip into the seam. So I'm going to snip either side of the seam on there. Okay, and into that one there, and into this one here. And again, this is something that you could prepare all of your blocks, and then you could sit in front of the television, or sit in the garden if it's nice and sunny, and do all of this at the same time. And it is well worth doing this, because what it'll do is it'll mean that your blocks will lie flat. Now, when you're quilting, if you've ever had the situation where you've been quilting along and when it comes to a seam, your sewing machine's had a real difficulty getting over the hill, as I call it, and you can feel it moving, then by cutting into here, and I'll show you, I'm going to open this up. In fact, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to set my seams before I open it up, because that just saves me a job in a minute. Okay, so I've set the seam there. Then what I'm going to do is, if I get my fingers in, I'm going to open up that centre where I've cut, and it comes out as a little cross, and all of the seams go round in a bit of a clockwork. So I'm going to show you. That's that one done. Actually, I think I missed a seam cut there, just in me hurry. This is why you need a pair of scissors that cuts to the very, very end. So can you see? Can you see? It's gone, and that's lying flat. Now, what I want you to do is, if you make your block, and don't open up to start with, and feel with your fingers, you'll feel a lump where the seams all intersect. And then if you do what I've just shown you how to do and get those seams open, oh my goodness, what a difference. It actually lies flat. So when that ends up going through your sewing machine, because I can bet your bottom dollar, if you're doing any free motion quilting, even if you're just sewing in general, you know, you're quilting in general, you always end up hitting that seam. Now, I used to have a Gamel sewing machine, and we used to do people's quilts, and without a word of a lie, more often than not, if they hadn't done this with their seams, where the pattern went, we had what's called pantograph pattern, and where the pattern went, the needle went right on that seam. And sometimes, particularly because the Gamel's like an industrial machine, it was like moving it over the hill. You could hear it rocking. You felt as if you were really forcing it, and that's because you had a lump. And often people, particularly the more points that they have, if they don't either open the seams, which I'm going to show you, which is what I did on the 12-inch block, or flatten the seams like this, it has what I call like a little Vesuvius mountain on. So you'll see it, and then you'll see a big lump in your block, and that's just because the seams are all meeting together and they haven't been flattened out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flatten that beautifully like that. That's it, lovely. And we've got our lovely block. So there's your 6-inch block finished, 6.5-inch cut. Now I said I'd show you the seams being open. So can you see here on that last seam, to get rid of the bulk, I've just opened it, so I've got a nice, it's I don't necessarily think it's as flat as the way I've done it previously, but it certainly gets rid of the bulk. So you've got a choice of opening the seams up. You could have opened all your seams if you'd wanted to, but I've just opened those last seams, or you could do it the way I've just done it, which is producing the cross. Now, if you made a 12-inch block, remember what I told you was for the centre you needed a 6.5-inch block, didn't you? 6.5-inch square for your centre. Now, if you've got lots of scraps, there would be no reason why the 6.5-inch centre cannot be another little block. So you could have this like a star within a star. So that would be your centre block, and then you'd have your points on the outside. It obviously doesn't fit exactly because we've got our seam allowances to take into consideration. So I hope you've enjoyed the first block in the 6-penny memory sew along. The next block will be posted next Saturday. It's on Facebook Live. It's on the 6-penny memories page at 10 o'clock. Feeling that it'll always be on here, a different version, slightly different version, but you'll be on YouTube. If you need anything, please contact me at sales@6, which is six-penny.com. And if you want to buy anything from our shop, it's www.6six-penny.com. And thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.